The cell was silent, so silent that Ethan Cole could hear the faint thump of his own heartbeat echoing off concrete walls. No voices, no footsteps, just the hum of recycled air and the occasional metallic clank from a distant door. That sound, the door, meant everything here. It was the only reminder that someone, somewhere, was still human enough to move. Ethan sat on the edge of his narrow steel bed, the mattress thin, the blanket coarse. A small slit of reinforced glass above the toilet let in a rectangle of gray Colorado daylight. He hadn't touched another human being in 8 years. Not a handshake, not a hug, not even the accidental brush of another person's shoulder. Nothing. It was 11:47 a.m. when he heard the speaker crackle. Cole. Rec. His recreation hour, 60 minutes in a concrete cage outside, alone, surrounded by mesh fencing and cameras that never blinked. He didn't move. Sometimes he didn't even go. Freedom didn't mean anything when you had no one to share it with. Ethan wasn't a violent man by nature, not anymore. He'd been remade by silence, his mind rewired by the years in a 7-by-12-foot box. At first, he fought it, punched the walls until his knuckles bled, screamed until his voice cracked. Then came the numbness, the strange emptiness that crept in like fog. But lately, something else had started to rise inside him, something raw and unfamiliar. A restless energy, an ache that no amount of push-ups or prayer could erase. It wasn't just loneliness. It was the kind of hunger that came from being human, one the system refused to recognize. He hated himself for feeling it, hated that his body still remembered what connection meant, even when his mind begged it to forget. He'd seen men lose themselves in this place, seen it from the small slot in his door. One inmate talked to his reflection until he stopped answering back. Another carved lines into his arm just to feel something real. ADX Florence didn't just cage your body. It dissected your instincts, piece by piece, until only shadows remained. That afternoon, when the lights dimmed to simulate night, Ethan lay awake on his back, staring at the cracks on the ceiling. Every sound felt amplified. The scrape of a food tray, the buzz of the intercom, the faint hum of security cameras watching him breathe. He turned his head and looked at the tattoos running down his arm, inked memories from a life that no longer existed. One read freedom is a lie. Another, still breathing. He whispered to the dark, "Why does it feel worse at night?" No one answered. Somewhere down the corridor, someone laughed. The sound was sharp, unhinged. The kind of laugh that came from madness, not humor. Ethan turned away from the noise, pressing his forehead against the cold wall. He used to think the walls were his enemy. Now he wasn't sure. Maybe they were the only thing keeping him sane. It was in that moment, the quiet before sleep, that Ethan realized something terrifying. His mind was beginning to betray him. He'd started to dream with his eyes open. Faces he hadn't seen in a decade appeared in the concrete texture. The echo of voices, his mother's, a woman he once loved, the guards, the ghosts, whispered from behind the vents. And sometimes, when the silence got too heavy, he found himself talking back. When dawn broke the next morning, Ethan didn't eat. He just sat, hands clasped, staring at the gray light cutting through the slit window. The world outside was still moving. Cars, people, clouds. But inside ADX, time didn't pass. It just looped. That day, something new arrived on his meal tray. A letter, creased, yellowed, with the official mark of the Bureau of Prisons. It wasn't from family. He had none left. The letter was from Dr. Reeves, the prison psychologist. "Ethan, I'd like to schedule an evaluation. The staff has noticed behavioral shifts. Please confirm." He didn't need to read between the lines. Behavioral shifts meant someone had seen him talking to the walls again. He signed the form and sent it back through the slot. That night, as the lights flickered out again, he whispered to himself, "Maybe it's time to talk. Or maybe it's already too late." The next morning the slot in Ethan's steel door opened with a hard scrape. A guard's gloved hand pushed through a folded paper, the schedule for the week. He already knew what was on it. Exercise cage, shower, lights out. But this time there was something else. Psych evaluation, 10 a.m. Ethan stared at the words for a long moment. Then he folded the sheet carefully and tucked it under his mattress, as if keeping it safe might give it meaning. Hours later, 2 guards appeared in black tactical vests. Step back, hands visible. Chains, cuffs, the shuffle down the corridor. He hadn't walked more than 20 steps outside his cell in months. Every movement was watched, timed, measured. They led him to a narrow room that smelled of disinfectant and cold metal. A single chair sat bolted to the floor. Across from it was Dr. Laura Reeves, the prison psychologist, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a calm tone that didn't match the place. "Good morning, Ethan." He nodded. No words. Reeves waited a moment, then began. "You've been in Florence for 9 years. Your records show excellent behavior, but the staff noticed you've been distant lately. Talking to yourself. Eating less." Ethan's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Everyone talks to themselves here. It's the only real conversation." She studied him quietly. "How do you pass the time?" He shrugged. "Push-ups. Reading. Remembering." Reeves leaned forward slightly. Remembering what? There it was, the question he hated most. Memories in ADX were like open wounds. He looked away. People. Things that used to feel normal. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy but familiar. "Finally," she said, "isolation does things to the mind. The body adapts, but the need for connection doesn't just disappear. It looks for substitutes, sometimes in unhealthy ways. That's what I'm here to help you manage." Ethan met her eyes, calm but distant. "You can't manage this. You can only survive it." The session ended early. When the guards led him back, the echo of his chains filled the corridor like a grim rhythm. Back in his cell, Ethan sat down on the cold floor. He thought about the word survive. What did that even mean here? Survive for what? Hours passed. From the vent above his bed came the faint hum of recycled air. Then, a voice, a whisper that might have been real or might have been his mind again. "Cole, you still there?" He froze. The voice belonged to the cell next door, one he hadn't heard in months. The inmates were kept far enough apart that even speaking was nearly impossible. "I'm here," Ethan whispered back. The reply came, raspy, human, fragile. "They moved me from D Block. Thought I was losing it. Guess they were right." It was Mendez, a man Ethan had spoken to once years ago, back when guards still allowed faint conversations through vents. Mendez said, "You ever feel like the walls are breathing?" Ethan closed his eyes. Every night. The two men stayed quiet for a long while, breathing in the same recycled air, linked only by sound. In ADX, even a whisper could feel like warmth. Later, as lights dimmed again, Ethan caught sight of his reflection in the small metal mirror bolted to the wall. His eyes looked older, heavier, like he was watching someone else live his life. He thought about what Dr. Reeves said, how isolation makes the mind reach for anything that feels alive. He didn't know whether that was comfort or warning. The last thing he heard before sleep was Mendez murmuring a prayer through the vent. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel completely alone. But deep inside, something uneasy stirred, because connection in this place always came with a cost. Weeks passed, and the faint connection with Mendez became a lifeline. Not that they could ever touch or meet. ADX Florence didn't allow that. But even a whisper through the vent or a scratch on the wall signaling, "I'm here," reminded Ethan he wasn't entirely alone. It was during one long afternoon, the sun a weak gray light filtering through the slit above his cell, that he noticed a pattern forming. Mendez had a rhythm. 3 taps for hello, 1 tap for danger, 4 taps for I'm thinking of you. Ethan began tapping back, experimenting, laughing quietly to himself at the absurdity of communicating like a code in prison. It was childish, maybe even pathetic, but it was human. Dr. Reeves noticed subtle changes in his behavior. During the weekly evaluation, she said, "Your records show improvement in your self-discipline, Ethan. Exercise, diet, and reading good. But there are small anomalies." He didn't ask. He didn't need to. He knew what she meant. His mind was still restless, still fighting against the walls, the silence, the endless confinement. That night, as the lights flickered out, Ethan lay back on his steel bed and stared at the ceiling cracks. The coded taps echoed in his mind. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was strategizing, counting, planning, building invisible bridges across concrete and metal. The mental effort was exhausting. Every day became a battle. Maintain composure in front of the guards, suppress the primal urges for human contact, keep the coded messages flowing. And yet, for the first time in years, Ethan felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt since the day he arrived at Florence: hope. But ADX didn't let hope stay unchallenged. One evening, During rec hour, Ethan was returning to his cell when a commotion erupted in the hall. Guards shouting, radios crackling, men banging on doors. Through the chaos, he heard Mendez's name called, sharp and urgent. A new inmate, transferred from another block, had been caught trying to reach Mendez. The guard pushed Mendez against the wall, searching him thoroughly. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The coded taps they had shared for months, their only tether, were under threat. After what felt like hours, the hall went quiet again. Guards returned to their posts. Mendez stumbled back to his cell, face pale, eyes wide, a tremor in his hands. That night, Ethan tapped softly against the vent. "Are you okay?" No answer. Only silence. Sleep didn't come easily. The mind races in moments like this. Ethan replayed the scene over and over, imagining every possible outcome: loss of contact, total isolation, the slow erosion of sanity. By morning, Mendez tapped back once, hesitant, fragile, but alive. A single message. That was enough. But the incident left a mark. Ethan realized that the fragile connection that had been sustaining him was perilously close to being shattered. Every day, every coded whisper became a balancing act. The stakes were no longer abstract. They were survival. Dr. Reeves, reviewing the incident in her notes, wrote, "Patient demonstrates coping through controlled communication with another inmate. Risk, psychological strain due to reliance on unstable social contact." Ethan read those notes in his mind and laughed quietly. She called it a risk. He called it life. Isolation had taught him many things: patience, observation, resilience. But it had also revealed a frightening truth. When the mind is starved of human contact, even the smallest connection feels like a lifeline, and losing it threatens more than just comfort. It threatens reality itself. That night, Ethan lay awake again, staring at the ceiling cracks. He thought of the taps, the whispered code, the tiny bridge between him and Mendez. He pressed his hand to the wall, listening. Somewhere, faintly, he felt it back. For the first time in a long time, the walls didn't feel entirely suffocating. But ADX Florence always had a way of reminding men who truly controlled their fates. And Ethan knew that his fragile hope, delicate as it was, would soon face its next trial. Days blurred into nights. The gray rectangle of light above Ethan's bed never changed, yet it marked the passing of a reality that felt like a lifetime. Every day, the routine was the same. Wake, eat, exercise, tap messages to Mendez, lie awake, stare at cracks in the ceiling. Yet beneath the monotony, something in him was shifting. He began to notice the edges of his thoughts fraying. Small irritations grew sharper. The sound of the vents, once comforting as a pathway to another human, now seemed intrusive, almost menacing. The hum of the lights above his head pulsed with a rhythm that matched his racing heartbeat. During rec hour, Ethan found himself lingering longer than usual at the fence, staring out at the empty expanse beyond. Not a single soul in sight, just concrete walls stretching toward the mountains. Freedom existed only as a memory. The sky, dull and colorless, seemed a cruel reminder of what he no longer had. Back in his cell, he tried to read, but the words blurred. He did push-ups and sit-ups, forcing his body to expend energy, to anchor himself in something physical, something tangible. But even the strain of exertion could not quiet the storm inside. At night, he lay on his steel bed and traced his tattoos in the dim light. Each mark was a memory, a fragment of life before Florence. The word survive etched along his forearm had never felt more literal. The others, faith, remember, strength, were faint comforts, reminders that he had once been human. Now, he wasn't sure he recognized that person anymore. The taps from Mendez were his only tether to sanity. But the fragility of that connection weighed heavily. One missed tap, one delay, could send Ethan spiraling into panic. It was a psychological tightrope, the mind clinging to a thin, invisible line over a yawning chasm. Dr. Reeves' sessions became a lifeline as well. She observed him closely, her questions probing, her presence calm, yet unyielding. "Tell me what you feel when the silence gets too loud," she asked during one session. Ethan hesitated. "It feels like the walls are alive. Watching, waiting. Like if I blink, it'll all vanish." She nodded. "You're responding normally to extreme isolation, but it's taxing your mind. You've learned to cope, but you're still under constant stress. That stress seeks an outlet, whether you realize it or not. He didn't respond. Words could not capture the gnawing emptiness. One evening, a small tremor passed through the cell block. An incident in another wing. A fight quickly subdued. Guards shouting orders. The sound of restraints. The ripple of fear traveled through the concrete. Ethan's pulse quickened. He tapped 4 quick knocks into the vent. A warning. Mendez tapped back almost immediately, his code steady and reassuring. Ethan felt a strange surge of relief. Connection, even this tenuous, invisible thread, was enough to anchor him for the moment. Yet the relief was temporary. The mind, starved for stimulation, craved more. He began inventing elaborate mental games. Counting the tiles in the ceiling, tracing imaginary maps of the prison in his head, replaying conversations he'd had years ago. Every thought became a puzzle, every memory a tool to maintain balance between sanity and collapse. Then came the night that changed everything. Lights flickered out, plunging the cell block into darkness longer than usual. Ethan, lying on his bed, felt the familiar panic rising. The taps from Mendez came slower, irregular, hesitant. Something was wrong. The next day, the rumor spread through the vent network. Mendez had been moved to solitary confinement for disciplinary reasons. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. The fragile lifeline that had kept him grounded, that had kept him human, was ripped away without warning. Ethan sat on his bed for hours, staring at the gray light. Dr. Reeves' words echoed in his mind. Your stress seeks an outlet. He realized that he could no longer rely on anyone outside himself. Every coping mechanism he had built, every invisible bridge, was now under threat. That night, he whispered into the vent anyway, a futile gesture. I'm here. Still here. No response came. Only silence. And in that silence, he felt the weight of Florence settle on him fully. The totality of isolation, the endless gray, the unyielding routine, and the raw, human need for connection. The silence hit harder than ever. Ethan lay on his steel bed, staring at the ceiling as if it held answers. Mendez had been moved. The only thread that had kept him tethered to humanity was gone. The coded taps, the faint whispers through the vent, the invisible connection, all severed. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the full weight of ADX Florence pressed down, a physical, crushing force. Days bled into one another. He ate mechanically, performed his push-ups, read from the worn library books, but the internal storm refused to calm. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the hum of the lights louder, and the cold air harsher. His tattoos, once comforting reminders of identity and strength, now mocked him silently. Survive, they said. Faith. Strength. But survival felt like an abstract word, devoid of meaning. Ethan began creating new routines. He marked the days with invisible tallies on the concrete floor, counted the breaths he took, and traced intricate patterns on the back of his hand to anchor himself. He whispered stories aloud, conversations with shadows, rehearsed dialogue he had long forgotten, just to hear a sound that wasn't the drone of the lights or the clanging of distant doors. Dr. Reeves noticed the shift during their weekly evaluations. Ethan admitted nothing, but she observed the tension in his hands, the flicker of agitation in his eyes, the rapid heartbeat beneath his calm exterior. You're finding ways to cope, she said carefully. Even without Mendez, your mind seeks patterns, routines, control. That's adaptive. That's resilience. Ethan wanted to argue. To say resilience felt like a lie here. But he only nodded. Words had lost their power. Action, small, deliberate, silent action, was the only reality. Then, one night, a minor earthquake tremor shook the block. It lasted only a few seconds, but for Ethan, it was monumental. Concrete cracked faintly, lights flickered, and the air seemed to shift. He rose from the bed, pressed his hand to the wall, feeling its vibrations pulse through him. For a moment, he felt connected, not to a person, but to the world beyond the walls. Nature, chaos, life itself. The tremor reminded him of the fragility of control and the futility of expecting permanence in Florence. The environment didn't bend to human will. It demanded adaptation, patience, and above all, endurance. Ethan began to redefine what it meant to survive. He didn't need contact to exist. He needed purpose within the cage. He assigned himself small goals, Memorize the ventilation system layout, catalog every crack and stain in his cell, map the faint sounds from neighboring blocks. These tasks, absurd to anyone outside, gave him a sense of agency. They were anchors for a mind that threatened to drift. Time moved differently in ADX Florence. Weeks felt like months, months like years. Ethan learned to focus on moments. Each breath, each tap of his fingers on the steel bed frame, each whispered story to the shadows. They became rituals, a language of endurance, a way to assert humanity against the crushing indifference of concrete and steel. He began to dream more vividly in his solitude. Not about people, not about freedom, not about the life he lost. Instead, he dreamed of control, of small victories, of building invisible structures within his mind that no one could touch. In the quiet, he realized he had become the master of his inner world. While the outer walls remained unyielding, the mind could still roam. Dr. Reeves documented his progress cautiously. Cole demonstrates remarkable adaptation, she wrote. Though severely isolated, he maintains mental clarity and resilience. Shows evidence of self-directed coping mechanisms, creative problem-solving, and controlled social simulation. Ethan didn't care about the documentation. He cared about the quiet victory. He could survive Florence, in his own way, on his own terms. The ache for connection, though present, had been tempered, reshaped, redirected. He had discovered a lifeline inside himself. One morning, the gray light slashed across his cell again. Ethan traced the familiar cracks on the ceiling and smiled faintly. Not joy, not happiness. This was something sharper, cleaner. Survival had been redefined. He could endure, adapt, and exist meaningfully within a place that sought to strip him of everything. He touched his tattoos, the ink a map of resilience. Survive. Faith. Strength. Now, each word carried a new meaning. Not reminders of the life he had lost, but proof of the life he had created in its place. For Ethan, the walls had become more than prison. They were instruments of discipline, crucibles of the mind, and mirrors reflecting his inner fortitude. He would never leave Florence, not in years, perhaps not ever, but he had discovered a freedom the guards could never take, mastery of his own mind. And in that realization, there was calm, not peace, not joy, but something stronger, endurance. ADX Florence is more than a prison. It is a test of human resilience. For inmates like Ethan Cole, survival is not measured in days or years, but in the ability to maintain identity, purpose, and sanity in the face of relentless isolation. These men endure what most could not imagine, coping with the weight of solitude, the hunger for human connection, and the challenges of a mind pushed to its limits. The story of Ethan Cole is not one of heroism in the traditional sense, but of quiet courage, the human spirit adapting to unimaginable circumstances. In a place designed to strip everything away, some still find a way to survive. And in their survival lies a stark, compelling lesson. Even in the most extreme conditions, the mind finds a way to endure.